All right, folks. Hello and happy Friday, the end of our first week of December. We're nearing the end of our cells unit. And today, what we need to do is we need to start talking a little bit about cellular division. It's the last topic that we're going to have in our cells unit. And it's one that we're going to see crop up over and over again for the next several units of this class. So that also means that it's not one that we're expecting that you guys understand everything from yet, because we're going to have some time for it. But let me get things started to at least show you where we are, of course, so that everybody can follow along. All right, so we are here, as always, in Schoology, still in Unit 3, the same place that we've been for a month. And we can see that because 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks. 4 weeks is a month. Thank heavens we're almost done with cells. Now, in week 4, we're going to be going back to our notes. And that's really all we're going to worry about today. Lab group's going to have the cell analogy to do today. But we're going to start around slide 62, where we can start talking about exactly what cell division is. And this used to be an animation that has clearly broken in the meantime that showed the cell dividing and splitting apart. But we will be talking today about cellular division, or its scientific term, mitosis. Now, it is important to note that everything experiences mitosis. Everything. If it is alive, then it experiences mitosis. There is no exception. Everything alive experiences mitosis. And that's because we need it to develop. In the case of human beings, we start as a single cell, smaller than the head of a pin, and we develop into like an 8 to 10 pound child for birth. That's all through mitosis. Making more cells is mitosis. That's the purpose of it. So most of you are still young enough that you're still growing. And as you grow, mitosis will create new bone. It will help to extend muscles. It will grow connective tissue and larger internal organs and new things that you need. All that growth is by mitosis because we're just making new cells. We also heal by that. Some of you have probably gotten hurt in your life, and you've recovered from it. Well, healing is the same idea. If you fall and it's bad, it just like rips the skin off of part of your arm. You get new skin by the old skin, those skin that's still left, multiplying and making new skin cells, right? And that's true for inside, it's true for outside, right? All of this is done by mitosis. And it's an incredibly important process for that reason alone. In the past, you needed to know all the different stages of mitosis. You needed to be able to tell the difference between prophase and metaphase and telophase, et cetera, et cetera. You do not need those anymore. So we will not be focusing on the stages. The state determined that, you know what, that might be a little bit too in-depth and a little bit too intense for what people actually need for life these days. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to look at comparisons between this cell in the middle and these cells around the outside. Now, everything around the outside is involved in the process of cell division. They are currently and actively dividing into new cells. The cell in the middle, this is what we call interphase. And this is the cell being itself. It's just living its best life. It's just doing what it's got to do, right? This is where most of your cells should be for about 90 to 95% of their life. They're just doing what cells do. And it's only when you need to grow, when you need to heal, that they get the signal from the nucleus that, all right, now it's time to divide. So we need to be able to identify the difference. So that when you look at a cell, you can tell, is it dividing or is it normal? The key to that is twofold. There are two things to look for. First, the easiest one, two nucleus. If you see two nucleus in one cell, it is in the process of division. It's almost reached this point where it's ready to split, but it isn't quite there yet. So if we're looking for two things, those two things should be two nucleuses. The other thing to look for is, if you remember, we had one organelle, a mysterious one. We talked about its purpose only vaguely. We said the centriole is used to help in cell division. Well, here it is. All right, when the nucleus gives the signal that it's time to divide, these centrioles, or these purple dots, they start to spread out. They start to grow these long tubes off of themselves. They connect to the DNA and stuff. They line it up. They pull it apart. They bring it back to their sides, and then it forms new nuclei and the cell divides. So if there aren't two nucleuses, then we can also look for these little lines, right? These are called spindle fibers. And if you see them anywhere in any of the diagram, then your cell is getting ready to divide or is dividing now. So that's what I want you to learn to look for. Look for two nucleuses or spindle fibers, these little lines in here. If you see either of them, then your cell is actively dividing. Otherwise, it'll look like this one, just being itself. True. Now, the end of this process, we will produce two daughter cells. Now, it's important to note the daughter cells are identical. They're not just identical to each other, they're also identical to the original cell. So this is cloning. For some species, this is the only way that they can reproduce. I'm looking at you, bacteria. A bacteria can just take itself, grow larger to a point, and then it needs to split. And when it does, it'll literally just break itself into two. They both have the same DNA because there's no new DNA. They're working with the same original stuff. And then you have two clones. In our case, we can demonstrate this with something like clay, right? We have this little ball of red clay. If I divide it into two daughter cells, they're both still the same red color. They are both identical to each other. There's no difference in what they are. All right, that is mitosis, taking one cell and just splitting it into two. Now, these are all the different phases that you used to have to know. Don't worry about them. You don't need to remember their names, but if you read what it's talking about, it becomes identifiable. So during interphase, the cell's preparing to divide. That's the normal place where it is all the time. Prophase, the DNA gets bundled and copied. Metaphase, the DNA lines up in the middle. Anaphase, the DNA is pulled to opposite sides. And then cytokinesis, the cell pinches off into two. We can see that right here. In prophase, we see that the DNA has changed from just a soup in the nucleus now into actual lines that we can see. Metaphase, it's lined up in the middle. Anaphase, it's being pulled to opposite sides. And then finally, telophase and cytokinesis, it divides. Now, there's a second form of cell division, and this is one that we're going to talk a lot more about in the future, but this is meiosis. And yeah, Technically, it should be pronounced meiosis, but I don't do that because my job is to try to make sure that you can remember things. So we're going to remember things by pronouncing it a little bit wrong. We're going to call this meiosis, and I'll explain why in just a moment. So meiosis is cell division for the purpose of making sex cells. Eggs and sperm in humans. Most other animals follow something similar, but not all. For things like fungus, it's spores. For plants, it's pollen, right? All of those are the sex cells that are only there to reproduce. Make no mistake, meiosis only exists for sexual reproduction. No other time, no other place, no other purpose. So mitosis happens all the time in every living thing to help them grow and heal and live. Meiosis only happens for sexual reproduction and only in sexually reproducing species. The end result, and the middle is not important. Don't even worry about looking at the middle right now. Look at the beginning. Here's the parent. 1, 2, 3, 4 chromosomes. Here are the daughter cells. There are 4 of them, not 2, and each one has 1, 2. 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2. So they each have half the DNA that the parent cell had. That's important. Here is another image of it with the same idea, but just using a little bit of color and shape to show you the DNA and how those 4 daughter cells each end up unique and different compared to each other and compared to the parent. That is key. When you're making offspring sexually, you do not want them to be identical to a parent. If we're going to make identical clones of ourselves, why go through the entire process? Why not just like pull an arm off and have it grow and recover into another individual? I know that sounds weird, but some animals do that. So when we compare these two side by side, you can actually see that mitosis ends here, which is the same point as here in meiosis. The only real difference is that meiosis is going to get one more division. Right here, these two stages are the same also. It's the same process. One just goes an additional step. Meiosis goes one step further. So to remember the difference between these, and this is why I want you guys to think of calling them mitosis and meiosis. All right, for mitosis, most people remember mito, as in the toe on your foot. How is that there? Because you grew a toe. It's the same as the rest of you. Its DNA is identical. It's just one of your cells, mitosis. And then people remember meiosis as me and my cis, meiosis. Because for you to have a sibling, a sister, that means that sexual reproduction had to take place. And the importance of this really cannot be understated for how things work. So let's start, right? Here's one parent cell. It is going to divide and create one, let's go with sperm. We'll say that this is from the male side of the equation, right? It's identical to the original in terms of its genetic complement, right? Well, here's mom's original cell. That cell is going to then divide into egg cells. Now, when the sperm and the egg come together, what that's going to do is that's going to mix and create something new. Something that is half one and half the other. The reason that meiosis exists is to make this exist. Now, you will likely see diagrams on the regions at the end of this year that look kind of like this with different numbers in the different cells. Don't worry about the numbers. The numbers are not important. It does not matter which number is in there. The only thing that you want to worry about is comparing the beginning to the end. If it starts at 2 and it ends at 2, that's mitosis. It made 2 identical daughter cells. They have the same DNA. That's what that number represents. If it starts with 2, but it ends with 1, then now you're getting half the DNA, right? 1 is half of 2. That means that meiosis occurred. And we were in the process of making sex cells, sperm or egg. And that's our cellular division. Mitosis, which happens in all living things and makes 2 identical body cells, or meiosis, which only exists for sexual reproduction and makes 4 sex cells, sperm and egg. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that clears it up and is helpful. I look forward to seeing everybody in class, and I hope that you have a great day. Take care.